They left the key on my porch like a dare small, brass, the kind you find in old drawers, dulled by years and stamped with a number, 1979, like a quiet reminder that something in this place belonged to a different time. I saw it first thing that morning, wedged between a paint can and a pile of rotting boards, and for a moment I thought it was just another old thing in a lot full of old things. Then, the next day, 3 identical letters showed up in my mailbox, crisp, polite, threatening in the way people who run committees are threatening, and the porch key stopped being a curiosity and started being a clue. My name is Ethan Cole. I fix old houses for a living, which means I read the bones of a place instead of reading headlines the way a floorboard creaks, a beam sags, the way someone once thought a porch should be wrapped in careful hands and a weekend. When I bought the Victorian at the edge of town, I thought I was buying a project and a place to breathe. I didn't expect to buy a fight. At first it was little things. A neighbor I'd never met telling me that community standards meant I couldn't park my truck by the mailbox. A friendly woman named Marjorie Hale dropping by with a clipboard and a smile that smelled faintly of bleach and power. She asked about permits, about paint color, then asked, in that calm way people use before they start making demands. When I planned to take down a tree they insisted blocked a shared view. She didn't wait for an answer. She left. The note she left behind was handwritten protocol for the safety and integrity of our neighborhood. Her name was printed on HOA stationery, a logo, a phone number, the kind of polish that hides edges. I should have shrugged. I should have called it what it was: busy work, petty enforcement. But the key nagged at me. I started looking through the attic for it to make sense of why someone would leave a thing like that where I'd be sure to find it. In an old house you learn to listen to the quiet, and the attic kept whispering. Someone had been packing, someone had left and decided to hide something. What we found inside a cedar trunk, Hank and I, along with a handful of neighbors who'd started leaning over my fence with skeptical faces, was the sort of thing that makes you believe in accidental justice. Paper, a ledger, bound in cracked leather. Minutes from meetings, signatures, a deed that predated the HOA's charter by decades. The ledger contained a pattern that felt like the end of a slow bruise. Coordinated purchases, a list of properties to be consolidated, notes on motivating owners to sell. The word convenience kept showing up, and next to it, numbers. That's when things escalated. First, a social media post, a private neighborhood group that I hadn't been invited to accusing me of unsafe renovations. Then a truck rolling up at dawn with orange cones, a string of tape, and someone filming my property like it was Exhibit A in a trial scheduled without a judge. Tools went missing. A Caldwell County inspector arrived with papers that didn't apply to my lot, and Marjorie's polite phone calls turned into texts that read less like guidance and more like chess moves. You learn people in fights. Marjorie was smooth as varnish, sharp, careful not to let her voice get too loud, never saying you in an angry way. She always used, "We're trying to help," as a placard. But when we finally crossed paths face to face, the mask slipped. "You don't understand how community works, Ethan," she said once, leaning on my porch rail like she owned the timbers. "Some people buy in, some people don't. Some people are easier to deal with than others." There was a smile there that didn't reach her eyes. There was a hand tucked in her purse like a constant promise that she could make whatever she wanted happen. Hank, who's lived 3 doors down longer than I've been alive, told me about a man who'd sold his land for a ridiculous check and left with a story about moving closer to family. A young couple across the street had a restraining order placed against them for reasons that never made sense. Paperwork filed by parties who popped up only when property changed hands. Patterns aren't law, but they're a map, and people who refuse to read maps wind up lost. So we did what you do when you can't make a call to a higher authority and expect honesty. We gathered proof. Lena Ortiz, a county surveyor recommended by a friend who trusts numbers more than suits, came with maps and a patience like a compass. She ran lines over old plats, over tax maps, over boundaries that had been quietly altered in filing cabinets. The truth of it was a small thing and a big thing at once. The HOA's jurisdiction didn't reach the way their notices claimed. 79 properties in the ledger had been nudged, encouraged, and finally purchased or vacated, and a majority of them were now under consolidated ownership connected to the same few names Marjorie kept politely avoiding when I asked questions. When we confronted her, it was not a scene from a courtroom, but it felt like one. I set the ledger on her dining table. We went to her house because she refused to meet on my porch and watched the color drain from the room. She picked up the book like you pick up an old hobby, with curiosity, and then her face went hard, like a storm coming in slow. "You shouldn't have those," she said, and I remember the cut of her voice, not pleading, not threatened, just precise. "You have no idea what you're meddling in. You're harassing people," I said, because it needed to be said, and because the way she smiled at my words made it clear she knew how it would sound to anyone watching. "You're pushing people out. We protect values," she said. "We protect investment." Then, softer, dangerously casual. "You can keep the house, Ethan, but know this: the easiest way to stop trouble is to make a deal." Offers came wrapped like gifts, checks that looked polite in bank envelopes, and a man named Paul who turned up at my door once, hands folded, apology in his voice, told me, plainly, that consolidation made taxes easier, maintenance simpler. When I refused, the pressure shifted into something colder. Calls in the night, a truck that idled for hours beneath my window, someone taking a sledge to the birdbath I'd repaired on a Sunday. The turning point came the day Hank found the stone. We were metal detecting the backfield on a lark, because Lena had mentioned an old foundation, and the machine bloomed like it was catching a heartbeat beneath the earth. Beneath a low cairn, we found a small metal tube, rusted shut. The key fit the cap like a hand in a glove. Inside, folded, brittle, smelling faintly of earth and something solvent, were the signatures. The original deed. A covenant that stated clearly that the landowners had intended these lots to remain independent. A notarized list of promises from a community that had once chosen not to be governed by a private board. There were names on the paper, names I recognized from the ledger, and the ledger's ink matched the same handwriting. When we went public with it, Marjorie's allies played their role: outrage at unfounded accusations, claims that we were fabricating evidence. But there's a power to paper and a cruelty to facts. The county opened a preliminary inquiry, the bank froze a few odd accounts, and suddenly the folks who'd been doing tidy acquisitions found themselves answering questions in rooms they'd never liked to be in. People who'd once taken a check came to the porch with tea and told stories about being strong-armed. The narrative shifted from "we're fixing things" to "we're being investigated." Still, the victory felt incomplete, like stitches in a shirt that might rip again. Marjorie didn't go to jail. She didn't even step down that week. What happened was more subtle and therefore more painful, a slow unraveling. Neighbors who had been scared into silence found a voice. People began to put their own documents in order, to dig into county records, to ask why boards have the power they do when nobody remembers voting for them. There's a scene I keep replaying in my head. Marjorie standing on her front step while a small crowd gathers by my porch, the ledger open on a picnic table, Lena taking notes, Hank making a joke that got everyone laughing because you'd have to laugh to stop yourself from wanting to shout. Marjorie, for a second, looked exactly like the woman in the ledger's photos, polished, purposeful, and then she looked smaller, like a role she'd long practiced didn't fit her as well in public. In the end, I saved the house, but that's not the point I want you to fixate on. The house is a place where things happen. The thing that changed was the neighborhood's willingness to notice. People who had treated welcome letters and HOA notices like iron laws began to question where the iron came from. And once that questioning starts, it doesn't end politely. We rehung the porch sign, but this time it read, hand-painted by neighbors. Neighbors first. It's a small thing. It's also a refusal. I tell you this because I know what it feels like to be a person who believes in small fixes: a new porch, a fresh coat of paint, and then find the problem is not the house but the rules that surround it. I know what it feels like to be offered an easy way out, a check, a promise, and to refuse because something inside you knows better. I also know what it looks like when a group of ordinary people decide to stop pretending that systems meant to protect them don't sometimes become the way people take advantage. So here's what I want from you. Tell me what you would have done. Would you have taken the check? Would you have left and found someplace easier to breathe? Do you think community rules help or hurt? And where do they cross the line from helpful to harmful? Drop your thoughts below. Be honest. And don't be afraid to argue. That's how we learn where justice lives. If this story resonated, share it with someone who needs to know that a single key can open more than a lock. Sometimes it opens a truth.